He made my daughter uncomfortable. I spoke up. Now they want me gone. It started with a look. Not a word, not a touch, just a look. But sometimes a single moment is enough to pull every alarm in a mother's mind. I was at the school late one afternoon, finishing up some reports in the break room, when I caught a glimpse of the new assistant administrator talking to a small group of kids in the hallway. Nothing dramatic, but then I noticed how he lingered, how his eyes followed them, just a bit too long, how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. I wanted to trust the place I had worked for 6 years, the people I shared lunch breaks and lesson plans with, the system I had dedicated my career to. But then my daughter came home one evening and said, "Mom, Mr. Thompson's weird. He stands too close. He touched my back and kept his hand there. I didn't like it." She was nervous even saying it out loud, like she wasn't sure if she'd get in trouble for it. My stomach dropped. I looked at her, this sweet, observant, funny kid who never made drama out of nothing, and I knew in my bones something was wrong. I didn't rush to conclusions. I took a breath. I asked gentle questions. I watched her face. I thought about how she'd never said anything like this before, about any adult. Then I remembered the hallway moment, that feeling, the unease that hadn't left me. The next day, I approached the principal. I told her what my daughter had said. I explained the context, the concerns. I asked if there had been other complaints, or if anyone else had noticed anything off. She smiled too quickly. "I'm sure it's nothing," she said, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "He's just getting to know the kids, probably just being friendly." I tried to press further, but her tone shifted. "Look, we can't go jumping to conclusions every time someone feels a little awkward. He's adjusting, let's give him space to do that." I walked out of her office with a pit in my stomach and the distinct sense that I had crossed an unspoken line, that by voicing concern, I had become the problem. But I wasn't imagining what I saw, and I knew my daughter wasn't lying. So I started paying more attention. I kept notes. I asked casual questions in the teacher's lounge. I observed how other kids reacted when he was nearby. Most didn't seem to notice, but a few, like my daughter, seemed guarded. One little boy would stop laughing the moment Mr. Thompson entered the room. Another girl suddenly switched to a different lunch table. Small details. But patterns form from small details. I wasn't accusing, I was protecting. When I picked up my daughter one day and she looked behind her shoulder before walking out of the building, I asked what she was doing. "Just checking," she said, voice low. "He always says bye when I leave." I didn't want to talk to him today. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about what would happen if I stayed quiet, if something worse happened and I had said nothing. I thought about all the stories I'd read, all the interviews on TV, all the mothers who said, "I had a feeling," and I thought, no, not this time, not my daughter, not on my watch. The next day, I informed the school social worker and 2 of her teachers. Not a formal report, not yet, but I needed them to be aware. I needed to know she'd be safe. They nodded politely, said they appreciated the heads up, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. The unspoken, "Why are you saying this? Do you know what this could stir up?" But I didn't care. She was my daughter. She deserved to feel safe at school, and I wasn't going to gamble with her comfort just to avoid making people uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I watched him like a hawk. He never went near her again. Maybe someone said something, maybe he noticed I was always around, maybe he felt the shift in energy. Whatever the reason, he kept his distance, and for a while things felt okay again. Not perfect, but quieter, like we were on the other side of a storm that hadn't broken. Until a year later, I got a message from another mother. That message would change everything. It came on a quiet Saturday morning, buried in a sea of notifications. A message from another mother, someone I'd known for years through the school. Our daughters had been in the same class. Her words were short, shaky, rushed. "Hey, I don't know all the details, but we reported something about Mr. Thompson. It's about my daughter. A detective might reach out to you." I remembered you had concerns too. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. That name, Mr. Thompson. After all this time, I had let my guard down. My daughter had moved up a grade and he had been reassigned to a different area of the school. We hadn't forgotten, but the immediacy of fear had faded, like a bruise slowly yellowing. And now, this. When the detective called, I was ready. I had my notes, dates, copies of emails I had sent to the principal and the social worker, all documenting my concerns. He asked to speak to my daughter, now a little older and more confident. We talked first. He was professional, calm, respectful. My daughter agreed to speak. She told him what had happened the previous year, the strange way Mr. Thompson would always find excuses to talk to her, the way he touched her shoulder, how it made her feel sick inside. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't emotional. She was brave. I watched her speak, my heart swelling and breaking at the same time. When the call ended, she looked at me and said, "Did I do something wrong?" I hugged her so tightly she had to ask me to breathe. Within a few days, the school knew. Someone from district security had delivered a copy of the initial police report to the principal. That's when everything shifted. I wasn't treated like a mother anymore. I wasn't a staff member. I was a liability. The principal called me into her office under the pretense of a follow-up. I walked in and the door clicked shut behind me. Her expression was stony. "We've received a report that includes your daughter's statement," she said, voice flat. "We're concerned about breaches of internal process and confidentiality." I blinked. Confidentiality? You were interviewed for a police investigation that should have been brought through us first. I stared at her. "He was the subject of the investigation," I said slowly, "and the police contacted me." "I didn't initiate anything," she waved her hand dismissively. "It's not about that. It's about how this impacts the school." She said the word allegations like it was poison in her mouth, like my daughter had made something up. After that meeting, things got worse. I was pulled into another session, this time with a representative from HR. No warning, no union rep. They wanted to debrief me again. This time the tone was harsher. They told me that by cooperating with the investigation, I had jeopardized the internal safety framework. I asked, calmly, what exactly that meant. "It means," the HR rep said, "that staff are expected to follow a chain of command. You bypassed it." "My daughter was a minor reporting discomfort around a male authority figure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What would you have had me do? Tell her to stay quiet?" Silence. The principal looked away. "We're not accusing her of anything," she said, "but you have to understand, these kinds of situations, they can be damaging." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "they can, especially when ignored." Weeks passed, but the pressure didn't. I was being isolated. Staff meetings that used to feel collegial now felt icy. People avoided sitting near me in the break room. Emails I sent to colleagues were left unanswered. Once I overheard two teachers whispering outside the copy room. One of them muttered, "That's her," and the other gave a sympathetic shrug. I walked in, grabbed my copies, and left without saying a word. It was clear word had spread, and the narrative wasn't on my side. Then came the official notice. I was receiving a formal write-up for breach of confidentiality. I couldn't believe it. I contacted my union immediately. A representative arranged to accompany me to the meeting. When we arrived, the HR director handed me a printed document outlining the write-up. As I read through the bullet points, my breath caught. They had quoted parts of my daughter's police statement, word for word, her own words used as evidence against me. I looked up. "You're disciplining me using a minor's victim statement?" The HR director looked uncomfortable. The principal stayed silent. "This is unacceptable," I said. "You're weaponizing her trauma to shut me up." "That's not our intention," the HR rep said quickly. "We're just following policy." "Then your policy is broken," I snapped. I signed the document to acknowledge receipt, but added in bold pen, "rebuttal pending within 10-day period." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat down with district board policy, employee protections, federal education laws, and crafted a rebuttal so thorough it could have passed as legal documentation. I cited every section they violated, including their failure to protect a reporting employee from retaliation. I included the fact that using my daughter's police testimony without consent was a gross ethical violation. I wrote it all out, cold, calculated, detailed. My union rep reviewed it and said it was assertive, maybe even aggressive, but accurate and solid. I submitted the rebuttal. Days passed, no response, then weeks. Emails unanswered, phone calls ignored. HR didn't even attach my rebuttal to the official write-up file, which is mandatory by district regulation. The silence was deafening. They weren't just trying to punish me. They were trying to erase my resistance. I wasn't going away quietly. I filed a formal grievance with the district. I named names, attached documentation, listed every meeting, quoted every inappropriate phrase, every legal misstep, every broken policy. I knew this wouldn't end quickly. I knew they'd stall and spin and try to twist the narrative, but I had already made my choice. If they thought they could bully me into silence, they'd picked the wrong mother. Almost 4 weeks later, the phone finally rang. A man from the superintendent's office said he'd be conducting a neutral conversation about my grievance. It's just a chat, he said, to get your side of things. He wouldn't allow my union rep to attend. That's when I knew this wasn't over. This was war. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in a small office tucked away on the 3rd floor of the district building, a place I'd never been invited to before. It felt cold, clinical, deliberately impersonal. I arrived 10 minutes early, holding a folder thick with documentation, emails, copies of board policy, and a printed copy of my formal rebuttal, just in case they continued pretending it didn't exist. The man from the superintendent's office, a middle-aged administrator with a practiced smile and forgettable face, greeted me with the same tone dentists use before delivering bad news. "Thanks for coming in. Just want to have a conversation, understand what's going on from your side." I nodded, sat down, and immediately hit record on my phone, which was tucked into my bag. Colorado was a one-party consent state. He didn't need to know. He began with small talk, then gradually leaned into the subject. "Some of the concerns raised in the grievance, they're serious," he said, "and we take them seriously." I asked why my rebuttal hadn't been attached to my disciplinary file. He shrugged. "That's an HR process issue. I'll have to check." When I asked whether it was standard procedure to quote a child's police statement in a write-up against a parent employee, he replied, "Well, when documentation becomes part of an active investigation, the district has access to it. There may have been some miscommunication." I stared at him, trying to decode whether he actually believed what he was saying. "So, you're saying it was appropriate to use my daughter's words against me?" I asked. He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, no one wants to be in this position. The district is under a lot of scrutiny right now. There's pressure. The goal is to avoid escalation." There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, just damage control. I asked him directly, why is the administration protecting a man who made multiple students feel unsafe, but punishing the mother who cooperated with the police investigation? He didn't answer, he just looked at me with that same neutral expression and moved on. If we could all just take a step back and focus on resolution, I'm sure we could move forward without any more misunderstandings. I kept my voice calm. "You've retaliated against me for fulfilling my duty as a mandatory reporter. You've ignored my legal protections, you've silenced my daughter's voice, and used her statement to undermine me professionally. If you think I'm going to settle for a misunderstanding, you're wrong." The meeting ended with no conclusion, just a vague promise to review the documentation. As I walked out of the building, I knew something had to change. They weren't going to fix this quietly. They were hoping I'd wear down, that I'd move on, that the fear of losing my job would outweigh my need for justice. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Back at home, I called a local education attorney. I didn't have the money to retain full-time legal representation, but I needed guidance. The attorney listened patiently, reviewed the facts, and confirmed what I already suspected. This was retaliation. Clear, textbook retaliation against a whistleblower. She offered to write a formal legal letter on my behalf and recommended I go public if the district continued to stonewall. "You're not the first," she said, "but you could be the one that finally pushes them over the edge." That same week, I received another blow. The HR department sent an internal memo, addressed to me and quietly CC'd to several senior staff, stating that I would be under performance monitoring for the remainder of the year. No details, no explanation, just a vague warning that my conduct and team integration were under review. It was a threat dressed as a policy. I showed the memo to my union rep, who was outraged. "This is a setup," she said. "They're trying to build a case to non-renew your contract. You need to protect yourself." I started documenting everything, every email, every comment, every strange interaction. Meanwhile, I learned that Mr. Thompson had quietly been removed from the building but not officially terminated. No public announcement, no explanation to parents. He had simply vanished from the halls one day. But inside the school, the silence was suffocating. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared speak about it. When I passed colleagues in the hallway, they gave tight nods or looked away completely. The isolation grew thicker. The ones who once considered me a friend now feared being seen with me. Then came the phone calls from parents. At first, it was just one or two mothers I'd spoken to over the years whose kids had been in my daughter's class. They had heard whispers, their kids had said things that echoed what my daughter experienced, weird jokes standing too close, being asked to stay behind after group activities. One mother broke down crying on the phone. "I feel sick," she said. "I told my daughter to be nice to him. I told her to be polite." Another parent asked if they should speak to the police. "I didn't tell them what to do. I just shared what I had done. I told the truth." Around that time, I received a message request on social media. It was from a former teacher who had left the school district the previous year. She wrote, "I heard what's happening to you. I wish I'd had your courage. I saw things too." But I didn't speak up. I was scared. That message hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't alone. I never had been, but the fear had kept everyone quiet, and the system depended on that silence. That night, I pulled up the district's whistleblower policy and read it cover to cover. I copied the relevant sections, highlighted every sentence that protected me, and started drafting another letter, this time addressed to the district board and superintendent directly. I outlined the retaliation, the silence, the failure to act. I included quotes from the HR memo, screenshots of ignored emails, and copies of supportive messages from parents and former staff. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every teacher, every parent, every student who had been dismissed, ignored, or punished for speaking the truth. I sent the letter, not just to the board. I sent it to a local journalist who covered education and had a reputation for digging into uncomfortable stories. I didn't include confidential details, no student names, no inflammatory language, just facts, documented, supported, undeniable facts. And then I waited. The next few days were a blur of tension. I went to work every day, wondering if I'd be called into another meeting. I kept my phone close, expecting backlash, but instead I got something else. A parent forwarded me a screenshot from a Facebook group. It was a post about a brave teacher who stood up for her daughter and got punished by the district. The comments poured in. Supportive, outraged, demanding answers. Someone posted a link to the board's contact info. Emails flooded the district office. A storm was coming, one they never saw coming. And I was done hiding from it. By the time the Facebook post had made its rounds and the local journalist began asking questions, the school was in full lockdown mode. Figuratively, not literally. Suddenly, everything was under investigation and confidential. Meetings that used to be scheduled openly were now conducted behind closed doors. I wasn't invited to staff planning sessions anymore. My calendar mysteriously cleared itself. I would learn about school events only after the fact. Colleagues who once waved and smiled now glanced the other way when passing me in the hallway. Some didn't even try to hide their discomfort. Others gave me forced, stiff nods that said, "I support you, but don't involve me." It was like I'd developed a contagious disease, and association with me was dangerous. And honestly, I understood why they were afraid. The way the administration moved, the way they controlled the narrative, it was precise, ruthless, and terrifying. They weren't correcting a problem, they were eliminating a threat. And that threat was me. I started noticing small things. Supplies I'd requested weeks earlier suddenly weren't in stock. My printer access mysteriously stopped working. My parking spot was reassigned. When I brought it up, the office secretary just said, "Administrative adjustments." I was told my classroom was being evaluated for possible reassignment next year. Another coincidence, surely. The principal had stopped speaking to me entirely, unless required by policy. When we crossed paths, she would glance at her phone or simply walk past like I didn't exist. At one point, I heard her joking in the lounge with another teacher. The moment I entered, the room fell silent. That kind of silence you can feel. Thick, judgmental, heavy. I stayed for less than a minute, grabbed my coffee, and walked back out. My hands shook as I carried the cup. The worst part was that I started doubting myself. Not my choices, but my strength. I began to dread going to work. Every day felt like a minefield, never knowing which step would trigger another manufactured complaint, another veiled threat. I wasn't sleeping well. I was snapping at my daughter. then apologizing immediately. I had constant headaches. I felt like I was being watched, like every word, every breath, every moment was being assessed. I wasn't crazy. This was by design. They wanted me paranoid, isolated, easier to break. Then, during a routine faculty meeting, something unexpected happened. A younger teacher, new to the school that year, stood up and asked why we weren't addressing the elephant in the room: the Facebook post, the investigation, the absence of Mr. Thompson, and the growing number of parent complaints. The room went dead silent. The principal, visibly irritated, replied, "We are not discussing confidential matters in open forums." The teacher persisted, gently but firmly. "Parents are asking questions. We're being asked questions. Shouldn't we know what to say?" The principal's face tightened. "Staff are expected to refer all inquiries to administration. That is not up for debate." The meeting moved on like nothing had happened, but I noticed a few teachers glancing at me afterward, not with scorn, but with curiosity. Maybe even concern. It was small, but something shifted. Around that same time, I received a message from the journalist I'd contacted weeks earlier. He'd filed a formal records request with the district and was looking into similar cases. He asked if I was willing to go on record. I hesitated. Going public meant risking everything: my job, my reputation, my family's peace. But then I remembered the look on my daughter's face when she told me about Mr. Thompson. How scared she had been, how proud she was when I told her I was standing up for her. I wrote back, "Yes, let's talk." Before the article came out, I sent one last formal letter to the school board. I listed every incident: the misuse statement, the retaliation, the HR memo, the isolation tactics. I included screenshots, documents, policy violations. I sent it certified, signed, return receipt. No one could claim they didn't receive it. Then the article dropped. It wasn't explosive, not the kind of clickbait that sets the internet on fire, but it was clear, factual, and damning. Local teacher faces retaliation after reporting concerns about administrator. It quoted my letter. It referenced the social media storm. It mentioned other parents who had come forward with similar stories, and it asked the one question the district had been avoiding: why was the teacher being punished while the administrator quietly disappeared? The backlash was immediate. Parents began emailing the board in droves. A petition was started demanding transparency and accountability. Local news picked it up. Suddenly, this wasn't just my problem, it was the community's. But inside the school, it got worse before it got better. I was called in again by HR. This time the tone was different, less overtly aggressive, more carefully neutral. "We're assessing all concerns and conducting a thorough review," they said. I asked why my rebuttal had never been attached to my file. They said it was an oversight. I asked why I was still under performance monitoring. They said pending resolution of internal processes. I asked what exactly that meant. They couldn't answer. I wasn't surprised. They were stalling, hoping I'd stop pushing. But I wasn't stopping. I filed a complaint with the State Department of Education, citing the district's failure to follow whistleblower protections and mandatory reporting laws. I reached out to a civil rights organization that advocates for school employees. I contacted a state representative who had spoken out about education reform and shared my documentation. Piece by piece, I was building a wall they couldn't climb over. Still, the loneliness lingered. I was standing on principle, but it felt like standing in a storm with no umbrella. I cried in my car more than once, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I doubted whether I could keep going. I wasn't sure if I'd have a job next semester. I wasn't sure I'd want it even if they let me stay. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was in my classroom after hours, preparing for a parent-teacher conference, when the young teacher from the meeting knocked on my door. "Hey," she said, "I just wanted to say, I've been watching, and I think you're doing the right thing. I don't know if I'd have the courage, but I'm glad someone does." She paused. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." She left quickly, clearly nervous, but her words stayed with me. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe others were just waiting for someone to lead the way. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I wasn't backing down. They had tried to push me out, wear me down, silence my voice. But they forgot something critical. I wasn't just a teacher. I was a mother, and mothers don't give up. They fight harder, they fight smarter, and when they fight for their children, they become unstoppable. The article didn't just stay within our small community. Within days, it was being shared on statewide education forums, teacher support groups, and even parent networks outside of our district. Each repost seemed to give someone else the courage to speak. I began receiving anonymous emails from staff across the county. "Thank you for standing up," one said. "What they did to you, they've done to others in quieter ways." Another read, "I left the district last year because of how they handled these things. I'm rooting for you." Each message was a reminder that this wasn't just about one administrator, one student, or one school. It was about a system built to protect itself, not the people it was meant to serve. The district's silence, once a tool of intimidation, now worked against them. Every non-responses, every deflection, every cold no comment was interpreted by the public as complicity. Parents began attending board meetings, demanding answers. Some stood up to read excerpts from the article, others shared their own stories. The board, so used to passive nods and half-empty rooms, suddenly found itself under a microscope. Inside the school, the tension reached a new level. Administration doubled down on the message that personal matters should not interfere with professional duties. A thinly veiled reference to me. They didn't name me, but everyone knew. The principal issued a staff-wide email reminding teachers that unauthorized communication with media outlets or social media commentary regarding district operations may be subject to disciplinary review. I read it twice, laughed once, and saved a copy to my records. The irony was thick. The same leadership that ignored inappropriate behavior for over a year was now obsessed with controlling the narrative. But the narrative was no longer theirs to control. I started working with the journalists more closely, offering documentation, witness names, and timelines. Everything I shared was verified, cited, and responsibly redacted to protect student identities. He expanded the story into a series, each piece focusing on a different layer: the district's retaliation against employees, the culture of fear among staff, the failures in mandatory reporting. One piece featured a former administrator who admitted off the record that they were discouraged from pursuing reports that would make the district look bad. It was damning, and it was gaining momentum. One afternoon, a television news crew appeared outside the district building. It wasn't a national story, not yet, but it was enough to draw attention. The superintendent issued a brief press statement promising a full internal review and affirming their commitment to student safety and employee protections. I watched the clip at home, my daughter beside me. "Is that the lady who didn't believe you?" she asked, pointing to the principal in the background. "Yes," I said softly. My daughter thought for a moment and then nodded. "I'm glad you didn't let them scare you." That moment, her calm, steady voice was more powerful than any media coverage. It was why I had started this fight, and why I would finish it. Behind the scenes, the district had begun damage control. A special committee was formed to evaluate internal policy violations. They requested a meeting with me, framed as a chance to clarify timelines and perspectives. I agreed under the condition that my union representative be present and that the meeting be recorded. They reluctantly consented. When the day came, I arrived with a binder full of documentation, my rep beside me. The committee consisted of 5 people, 3 district officials, 1 legal advisor, and an HR representative I had never seen before. They started with polite introductions, but the tone quickly shifted when I began presenting evidence. I laid out every policy they violated, every documented retaliation, every instance of administrative negligence. They interrupted, tried to redirect, but I held firm. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I simply spoke the truth, clearly, calmly, relentlessly. When I mentioned that my daughter's police statement had been used in a disciplinary document against me without parental consent, I saw a flicker of genuine discomfort in one woman's eyes. "That wasn't authorized," she whispered to the legal advisor beside her. It was a small crack, but it was enough. After the meeting, my union rep turned to me and said, "They weren't prepared for that, you've got them scrambling." I wasn't interested in watching them scramble, I wanted change. Meanwhile, more parents joined the conversation. A group of mothers created a community coalition calling for transparency in school investigations and protections for parent employees. They launched a public campaign with signs that read, "We believe teachers," and "Protect the kids, not the reputation." It was surreal to drive by the school and see the lawn dotted with those signs. For so long, I had felt alone in this fight. Now I could feel the tide turning. A parent-organized town hall was scheduled at the local community center. The district tried to stop it, citing conflicts with scheduled district events, But the organizers moved forward anyway. Over 100 people showed up, teachers, parents, even former students. Some spoke about their experiences, others asked for policy change. I stood in the back, anonymous, watching. When one mother took the mic and said, "If we don't support the people who protect our kids, what does that say about us?" The room erupted in applause. Still, the district refused to issue a formal apology or retract the write-up from my file. It was their last grasp at control, but their grip was slipping. I filed a final complaint, this time with the Office for Civil Rights. It included everything: the retaliation, the emotional distress, the administrative negligence. It was now a federal matter. The superintendent called for a closed-door board session. I wasn't invited, but word leaked that a vote was held on administrative leadership changes. Shortly after, the principal announced her retirement. No ceremony, no flowers, just an email and a departure date. Mr. Thompson, the administrator at the center of it all, quietly surrendered his teaching license. It didn't make headlines, there was no press release, but it was confirmed in the state database: license inactive, non-renewable. When I saw that, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but also relieved. For the first time in months, it felt like justice was no longer something I had to fight for alone. 1 week later, I received a letter from the district office. My write-up had been officially removed from my record. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a dry, bureaucratic statement: "After review, disciplinary documentation has been rescinded." I folded the letter, placed it in the same binder that had followed me through every meeting, and closed it. It was over. Not the healing, not the recovery, but the battle, the wall they had built around me had cracked. And through that crack, the truth had spread like fire. After the district rescinded the write-up, I expected to feel more than just relief. I expected to feel vindicated, triumphant, like I had won something meaningful. Instead, it felt hollow. Not because I regretted the fight, I didn't, but because nothing they did could undo the damage. The isolation, the stress, the constant fear of retaliation, the way my colleagues had looked at me like I was radioactive, all of that left scars. Still, something had changed. The silence had broken. People who once avoided me began to reappear. A teacher I hadn't spoken to in months dropped a note in my mailbox: "You were right to fight. I'm sorry I stayed quiet." Another colleague stopped me in the hallway looking sheepish. "I wish I'd had your guts," she said, then hurried away before I could respond. It was bittersweet. Their support was welcome, but late. The kind of late that doesn't erase how alone you felt when it mattered most. The school year ended in an awkward limbo. The principal was gone, but no replacement had been announced. Mr. Thompson had vanished completely, and no one dared speak his name anymore. The district was still holding internal meetings, reassessing policies, and conducting sensitivity training as part of their public relations response. I was offered a new position within the district, a leadership role at another elementary school. With a modest raise and more administrative responsibilities, it was clearly a peace offering, a way for them to move on without admitting wrongdoing. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in a system that had fought so hard to silence me. But when I told my daughter about the offer, she smiled and said, "That school's lucky. You'll protect the kids there too." That settled it. I accepted the position, not as a favor to them, but as a choice for myself. I would take the seat at the table, not because they handed it to me, but because I earned it. The transition wasn't smooth. My new staff greeted me with caution. They knew who I was. Everyone did. My reputation had preceded me, and not everyone saw that as a good thing. Some admired my determination. Others saw me as a troublemaker, someone who disrupted the peace. But I didn't come to make friends. I came to build a better space for students, for staff, for the people who often went unheard. I held meetings with the faculty and made it clear: transparency, communication, and student safety were non-negotiable. Some rolled their eyes, others leaned in, a few asked hard questions. I welcomed them. We weren't going to pretend everything was fine. We were going to fix what needed fixing, no matter how uncomfortable that made people. I also began working closely with the parent coalition that had formed during the scandal. We created resource packets for families, offering guidance on how to report concerns, how to escalate issues, and how to protect their children within the school system. We hosted community nights with guest speakers, counselors, education lawyers, advocates for mandatory reporters. Slowly, the culture around me started to shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and persistent, like rain softening hardened ground. But the district still wasn't done trying to control the narrative. One morning, I received a call from the superintendent's office. They wanted me to film a reconciliation video for internal use, something about healing and moving forward together. I nearly laughed. "You want me to make a video?" I asked, "after everything?" The communications officer on the other end stammered, "Well, yes, it would really help close this chapter. Show how far we've come." I paused. "You mean show how far I've come? Because the district hasn't changed a damn thing until it's forced to." She didn't respond. I declined the offer. I didn't owe them closure. My job wasn't to help them sleep better at night. My job was to keep the door open for anyone coming behind me. Months passed. My daughter flourished in her new school, her confidence returning piece by piece. She joined a robotics club, made new friends, and stopped checking over her shoulder every time she walked out of a classroom. Watching her reclaim her safety was the only apology I ever needed, and for the first time in a long while I felt at peace. Not because the system was fixed, it wasn't, but because I had reclaimed my power within it. Then something unexpected happened. The same journalist who had followed my story reached out again. He was writing a follow-up, this time about change. He wanted to highlight the parent coalition, the new policy drafts being proposed, the cultural shift within the school community. "You're the through line," he said. "You were the catalyst." I told him I didn't want to be the face of anything, that this wasn't about me. "It started with you," he said, "but it's about everyone who saw you fight and realized they could too." I agreed to be interviewed on one condition, that the piece focus not on my pain, but on the progress that came after it. The article ran with the headline, "From Retaliation to Reform, How One Voice Sparked a District-Wide Reckoning." The night it went live, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset, my daughter reading beside me. The air was still. For once, no anxiety sat heavy on my chest. I had walked through fire and made it to the other side. Not untouched, not unscarred, but standing, stronger, sharper, and determined to make sure no one else had to go through what I did alone. I began receiving emails again, this time from other districts, asking if I would speak at professional development sessions, workshops on whistleblower protections, or forums on mandatory reporting. I said yes to the ones that felt purposeful. The rest I ignored. I wasn't looking to build a brand. I wasn't interested in being a symbol. I just wanted to make sure no one ever had to choose between protecting their child and keeping their job. And if I had to keep reminding people how quickly systems will turn on those who threaten their comfort, then so be it. One day, at the end of a long faculty meeting, a teacher I barely knew approached me and said, "You changed the way I think about this job. You reminded me why I started teaching in the first place." That was worth more than any award, more than any title, because when the dust settled, it wasn't about being right, it was about being heard, about standing for something, about refusing to let fear win. They tried to burn down everything I had built, my reputation, my peace of mind, my career. But I rebuilt, not in the image of what was, but in the hope of what could be, and brick by brick I made something stronger, something they couldn't take away, something rooted in truth, watered by courage, and grown from the kind of love only a mother can wield. Life eventually settled into something that resembled peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes after surviving. The new school year brought with it a fresh staff, a new principal with a spine, and a quieter, steadier atmosphere. My mornings no longer started with anxiety gnawing at my stomach. I arrived at work, greeted colleagues who now looked me in the eye, and moved through the hallways without that invisible wall of tension pressing down on me. It didn't mean everything was perfect. There were still whispers sometimes, still the occasional glance that held questions. But there was also something else, respect. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. My daughter thrived in her new environment. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and began to carry herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are protected. Every time I saw her walk out of school, backpack swinging, smiling without checking behind her, I was reminded of why I fought so hard. She no longer asked if Mr. Thompson would be there. His name hadn't passed her lips in months. She had moved on, and in her healing, I found my own. One afternoon, as we were driving home from school, she asked, "Mom, are you glad you didn't stay quiet?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about everything, the fear, the nights I couldn't sleep, the meetings, the retaliation, the loneliness. I thought about the letter removing the write-up, the article that sparked change, the staff members who had quietly thanked me, the parents who told me they finally felt safe reporting things. I thought about the wall I had stood against and the cracks that had finally brought it down. "Yes," I said, "I'm glad. Even when it was hard, especially then." She nodded and turned back to the window, satisfied. That moment became a kind of bookmark in my life. A place where one chapter closed and another began. I no longer walked with my fists clenched, waiting for the next blow. I walked with purpose, with presence, with pride. Not because I had won, but because I had endured. And because in enduring, I had reminded others that it was possible to fight back and win. I continued working with the Parent Coalition, but less frequently. They didn't need me to lead anymore. New voices had stepped up. That in itself was a victory. We had built something sustainable, something that would outlast a news cycle or a school year. A culture of accountability had begun to take root, not everywhere, not overnight, but in enough places to matter. There was one moment near the end of the year that stayed with me. A young teacher, barely out of college, stopped me in the hallway. She looked nervous, like she had rehearsed what she wanted to say a dozen times. "I heard what you did last year," she said. "I just want you to know. If anything ever happened again, I wouldn't stay silent. Because of you." I thanked her and she walked away quickly, embarrassed. But I stood there for a long time, letting her words settle. That was the legacy I wanted. Not fear, not pain, not war, but courage passed down, quietly, steadily, like a torch in the dark. People often talk about justice as a moment, a gavel hitting a desk, a decision handed down, a headline. But real justice is quieter than that. It's the freedom to walk into work without fear. It's the knowledge that your child feels safe. It's seeing systems shift, even slightly, because you refuse to look away. That's what I'd earned. That's what they couldn't take from me. They had tried to erase me, to scare me into silence, to punish me for protecting my child, but they failed, and in their failure, they revealed exactly who they were. I didn't expose them with rage or vengeance. I exposed them with truth, with patience, with unwavering resolve, and when the dust finally settled, I was still standing. They underestimated a mother. That was their first and last mistake.